You know, it was striking a minute ago seeing the Democratic leader, Senator Harry Reid, calling out the majority leader for filling the tree, for engaging in the same procedural abuse that Harry over and over and over again in this body. Now the Republican leader is behaving like the senior senator from Nevada. What we just saw was not, Madam President, what the majority leader told you and me and every other Republican senator. What we just saw was not that the proponents of the Export-Import Bank, like anyone else, could stand up and offer whatever amendment they liked on any issue. What the majority leader just did is, number one, he called up that amendment. He called it up himself. Now, why does that matter? Because as majority leader, he has priority of recognition. When he calls up an amendment, no one can stop him. He didn't just call it up, he filled the tree. Just like Harry Reid, he filled the tree, blocking everyone else's amendment. And by the way, I agree with Senator Reid when he said the Obamacare amendment is a cynical amendment. Of course it is. It is empty showmanship. We'll have a vote on repealing Obamacare. The Republicans will all vote yes. The Democrats will all vote no. It will be at a 60-vote threshold. It will fail. It will be an exercise in meaningless political theater. Now, mind you, when we had a fight in October of 2013 to actually stop Obamacare and to defund it, the majority leader, then the minority leader, was opposed to doing something with real teeth in it to stop Obamacare. But an empty show vote, that's a good way of distracting from what's going on.
All right, that was Senator Ted Cruz on Friday, and many of the arguments I've been making on this program. We've had 50 show votes on repealing Obamacare, but actually using constitutional authority given to Congress to defund Obamacare. That power was never used. Same thing with executive action on immigration by the president. We were told, pass the Cromnibus, we'll give up all our leverage on spending, and we won't fund the Department of Homeland Security. They ended up funding that and the president's illegal, unconstitutional executive amnesty. Senator Ted Cruz, now a pariah once again among his Republican friends in the Congress. How are you, sir?
Sean, it's always good to be with you.
Well, I got to be honest. I stood up and cheered when you did all of this because I feel that the Republican Party in Congress, I think governors have been far more bold. I don't know if you agree with that. But the Republican Congress has been weak and timid and unwilling to fight on very key issues.
Well, that's exactly right. And the reason for that is who they're listening to. It's not the case that they don't fight. They will fight tenaciously for corporate welfare, for cronyism, for growing government. They just don't fight for you and me. They don't fight for conservative principles. It's what I call the Washington cartel. Career politicians in both parties who get in bed with lobbyists and special interest and grow and grow and grow government. And we saw this week really a powerful illustration of the Washington cartel. We saw what I call the McConnell-Reed leadership team, because they're one and the same. It's all part of the party of Washington. You know, you rightly mentioned that we had an election in November. It was an historic election. We won massive majorities in the House. We won a majority in the Senate. We retired Harry Reid.
By the way, Senator, it was also an election that many Republicans predicted would be disastrous because you dared to filibuster over the issue of Obamacare and ended up being a historic election.
You're exactly right that a year earlier, all the Republican graybeards said we were going to get killed because for one brief moment we were actually standing and fighting for our principles. Well, it turned out we won a tidal wave tsunami election, and the number one issue was Obamacare, the issue that we had mobilized and energized millions of people across this country.
You know, one of the things that has not been asked, as I noticed they've been following the events that unfolded yesterday, and quote, the headline is that fellow Senate Republicans rebuked Ted Cruz and so on and so forth. Here's the question that nobody in the media seems to want to ask, but I've been asking, and that is, did Mitch McConnell make you the promise that you say he made? Now, right. Mike Lee says he did, and two of your fellow senators told me privately that, in fact, yes, they heard 3 times Mitch McConnell say that to you, that there was no deal made, but they don't want to say it publicly. Now, I have to honor the fact that I was off the record with them, but in reality, I see no evidence that that promise was not made.
Well, and it was also what both McConnell and Boehner were saying publicly to the press. There is no deal, there is no deal, there is no deal. I mean, this stems, for your listeners who haven't followed the play-by-play, back to May when TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, was up, and it appeared that leadership had cut a corrupt deal to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank, a classic example of corporate welfare and cronyism. And at our Senate lunch, I challenged Mitch McConnell. I stood up and just asked him what deal was cut. And he looked at me, he looked me in the eyes in front of every other Republican.
And he was angry.
He was visibly angry, and he said, there is no deal, there is no deal, there is no deal.
And how many fellow senators were there?
Well, there are 54 of us all together. Most of us were there, not everybody, but it was. My guess is, I don't know, 3/4 or more of the conference. It was our Thursday lunch, so it's a little bit less attended than the others, but it was still a relatively full room.
Explain what happened yesterday.
Well, yesterday we had two things happen. One, a series of senior senators stood up on the Senate floor and essentially reprimanded and attacked me for daring to speak the truth. And I would note the speech I gave, the floor speech I gave on Friday, was very calm. It was very measured. It simply described, this is the promise Mitch McConnell made to every Republican senator, and this is his conduct today that is directly contrary, that is directly breaking that promise, that rendered the commitment he made to each of us a lie. Now, in the moss-covered walls of the Senate, speaking the truth is deemed a radical act. And indeed, yesterday on the Senate floor, I quoted a quote often wrongly attributed to George Orwell, that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth can be a revolutionary act. Now, I certainly agree it should be done with civility and decorum, but telling the truth is consistent with the best traditions of the Senate. But what we saw happen next was even more stunning. So I had introduced an amendment to this bill, the highway bill that's before the Senate, that would prevent sanctions from being lifted on Iran unless and until Iran acknowledges Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and releases the 4 American hostages who are languishing in Iranian prisons, suffering. Sadly, Republican leadership led the effort to block that vote. They did not want to vote on that, and so they shut it down. Immediately after that, Senator Mike Lee tried to bring up his amendment to defund Planned Parenthood. Again, Republican leadership, it wasn't the Democrats who were fighting, it was Republican leadership that was fighting to stop any effort to defund Planned Parenthood. And this is why people are so frustrated.
Let me go over this, though, in detail. This is important. So
Yes.
the Republicans won't use the power of the purse to defund health care, or at least the majority of health care that they can defund. As I understand it, there are some aspects they may not be able to. They won't use the reconciliation process, whereby they would only need 51 votes to repeal the law. That hasn't happened yet. They didn't stop the president's executive action on amnesty.
Right.
Here you're asking for simple provisions as it relates to Iran. And by the way, the IAEA this weekend was denied access by Iran to the site where the nuclear detonations were being tested. So anyway, so all you're saying is acknowledge Israel's right to exist, get these 4 Americans home, which the president didn't negotiate, defund Planned Parenthood in light of the videos that we have now seen. And to me, every one of those should be no-brainer fights for the Republicans, 90-10, 80-20 issues with the American public.
You're exactly right. And the point to understand, it's not that the Washington cartel is incompetent, and it's not that they don't fight or can't fight. It's what they fight for. They fight for bigger government. They fight for corporate welfare and cronyism. The people they are listening to are the lobbyists on K Street and Wall Street, and they fight tenaciously for something like the Export-Import Bank, hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer loan guarantees paid out to a handful of giant corporations. The people they don't listen to are the grassroots conservatives that elect us, are the men and women back home. As I pointed out on the Senate floor, listen, I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of town halls. I've never heard a single citizen stand up and say, we really need the corporate welfare that is the Export-Import Bank. I hear people all the time who ask, can you do something about sanctuary cities? Can you do something about amnesty? Can you do something about defunding Planned Parenthood? Can you do something about Iran? Can you do something about tax reform? If we were listening to the people back home, that's what we would be voting on, not policies that enrich the lobbyists in Washington.
What's really sad, and I'll take this back to 2013, Senator, is that when you went and you engaged in that filibuster, if I recall, let me see if I got this right, Rand Paul stood with you, Marco Rubio stood with you. Who else stood with you? It might have even been Mitch McConnell, who was up for re-election.
He did not, actually.
He did not. Okay.
When we did the filibuster on Obamacare,
who went out there? Mike Lee gave you some relief.
Mike Lee was there the entire time and was stalwart and valiant.
Right. And by the way, for those that don't know, for nearly 24 hours, you're standing on your feet and you can't even go to the bathroom. And anytime somebody takes the microphone, yes, let's hear from the gentleman from Utah or the gentleman from Florida. But so there were basically 3 senators that came to your aid. But yet that was a promise that every Republican House member and every Republican senator made, that they would repeal and replace Obamacare. And when the moment of truth came, and this wasn't going to be a show vote, and you'd actually use your constitutional authority and defund it, you stood there with 3 other people, and they were, 2 of them were there briefly.
Yeah. Well, and the point that is so... And
you became a pariah in your own party for standing up for what all of them promised. I don't get it.
The point that is so revealing is in 2013, the person who led the effort to stop us, led the effort to preserve the funding for Obamacare, was Mitch McConnell. It's why I refer to today the McConnell-Reed leadership team. In 2013, it was the Reed-McConnell leadership team. It's one party. It's the Washington Party. And whichever one's wearing a hat doesn't make much difference. As you know, my new book, A Time for Truth, which just came out, takes readers behind closed doors to what's happening in Washington. It reveals the corruption of the closed-door lunches. And I'll tell you, Sean, what we're seeing now is why we're not going to turn this country around from Congress. Even with a Republican Congress, with leadership that is part of the cartel, we won't turn it around. It's why the presidential race matters so much, that we need a strong conservative in the White House, like Ronald Reagan, who will stand up to the Washington cartel. And I think one of the questions primary voters are asking of every candidate in 2016 is, show me when you've stood up to the Washington cartel, not just to Obama and the Democrats. When have you stood up to your own party, to Republican leadership, and stood with the people? I'll tell you, if I'm elected president, Sean, in 2017, if Congress tries to pass more corporate welfare, as president, I'll veto it. If Congress doesn't focus on issues like sanctuary cities, like repealing Obamacare, like abolishing the IRS, then as president, I will lead the fight to do those, both using executive authority where appropriate, but also energizing and mobilizing the American people, just like Ronald Reagan did, using the bully pulpit to pass fundamental tax reform. That's how you move Congress, with a president willing to stand up to the Washington cartel.
Senator, it's a powerful indictment against the bureaucracy in Washington, and I want to save this country. I'm worried about whether or not the time has slipped past us at moments in my life. And what a sad testimony about how Republicans have lost their way. I remember Reagan was asked, he raised a rhetorical question in a speech that he gave. Is it a third party we need? He said, no, it's a revitalized second party. We need a revitalized second party. I'm disgusted with the Republican Party in Washington right now, with you and a few very rare exceptions.
I will give you a word of encouragement, which is sometimes things have to get really bad.
Oh, they're bad.
To wake people up. And 2 things are happening.
They're bad, Senator.
Yes, they are, but 2 things are happening. Number one, conservatives are fed up with the Washington cartel. And we're seeing, we saw it in 1980, a grassroots movement that became the Reagan Revolution. It's been incredible, our presidential campaign. Do you know of the 16 Republican candidates for president, do you know which campaign has raised the most hard money in the entire campaign?
Who?
We have.
I'm not surprised.
We've raised $14.3 million. In second place is Jeb Bush with 11.4. Now, if I'd have told you that we were going to outraise every Republican in the field, including Jeb Bush, you'd have said I was nuts.
No, I don't think so. I can see what's happening. I wish I had more time. Now, I have some good news, though, is you're going to join us on TV tonight.
Yes.
All right, and we'll see you then. And, Senator, thank you for standing up on Friday. And I know we need new leadership. That's clear to me, because this leadership, I think, is timid and weak and afraid of their own shadow. It's unfortunate.
We've got to stand from the people. It's got to come from the people. The money we've raised has been 175,000 contributions at tedcruz.org. Tedcruz.org. The people can turn this around like we did in 1980. We're going to do it again, Sean, and you're giving powerful voice to the need for freedom and the Constitution in this country.
Senator Ted Cruz standing up to the elite in Washington. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, my friend.